Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figure It Out Productions. The following video is part of our Quick Shoot series.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to part 3 of my 4th video game generation retrospective. Today we're going to be talking about the Sega Genesis. Part 1 is about the series as a whole, and part 2 is about the TurboGrafx-16. I invite you to check those out before watching this. Now, the Sega Genesis is what we called it in North America. It was called the Sega Mega Drive pretty much everywhere else. I'm going to be referring to it as the Genesis because I am an American. That's what it was called here. But in case you're curious why that difference exists, the Mega Drive is what it should have been called. But there was some sort of trademark issue. I don't know who owned the phrase Mega Drive or what they ever did with it, but because of that, I don't know if it was even in the US or if it was Canada or what it was, but one of those two countries had it trademarked for something, and as a result, they couldn't call it that here, so they changed the name to Genesis. So there you go. Now, this console is fascinating for a lot of reasons, and I love it, so I can't wait to start talking about it. Now, this console came out in 1988 in Japan, 1989 in North America. And while we all think of it as this console that went head-to-head with the Super Nintendo, like, to this day, the most iconic video game console war ever. You know, where the whole point was, we're a dedicated video game company, and we're a dedicated video game company. And the only way we're going to beat each other is to make the best games possible. That was it. That's all they had. There was no Netflix, there was no YouTube, there was none of that shit. It was all, I have to make better games than you if I'm going to win. Well, we all think of that with the Super Nintendo. The irony is, this console was actually intended to compete with the NES, not the Super Nintendo as eventually came out. Because the Super Nintendo came out 2 years later. I mean, the Super Nintendo launched in Japan in 1990, 1991 in North America. By that point, the Genesis had been out for a while and had already made a lot of noise. So, the funny thing about the Genesis, though, is really what happened was the Sega Master System. It's Sega's third generation console. Didn't do well in North America. It did, I think, okay in Japan. It did pretty well in Europe and South America and Australia, but Sega's kind of a conglomerate of American and Japanese ideas. Like, it's a Japanese company, but it was birthed in America and it's kind of shared between the two. And I think they just wanted to control at least one of those two regions, so that's why they said, okay, we're going to do what they eventually traditionally made the model out of, which was drop our hardware early and move on. Now, it worked in this case, but it didn't ever work again, unfortunately. But, yeah, so the Genesis, the idea was, well, the Master System was more powerful than the NES, but it didn't really matter. It wasn't powerful enough that people could really tell the difference. Also, because of a situation with Nintendo and third-party developers, at least in North America, I think this didn't apply in Europe, and I'm not sure about Japan. But basically, what Nintendo told third-party developers was, if you make games for the NES, you can't make them for anybody else, namely the Master System or anything Sega produces. So Sega was basically screwed when it came to the Master System. They couldn't appeal to people, but they thought if we release a more advanced console, we can make our own games for it, and we can really just show people why you need our new generation hardware, and developers will come. They will give up on Nintendo. We will present them as an archaic antique. And they did an awesome job of that. Do you guys, I don't remember this personally because it happened before I was cognizant of media, I guess, and advertising, but there were ads. You can look them up on YouTube, all like, Sega does what Nintendo don't. Sega had the most aggressive ad campaign I think that ever existed in video games. I mean, maybe there were some more extreme ones, but this is certainly the most notable. They basically made you feel that if you didn't have a Genesis, you were a fucking pussy. Like, they never called you that, but that's basically how it was presented. It was like, hey, what are you doing with an NES? Have you seen the Genesis? Do you see the graphics there? Do you see how fast that is, the colors, the fluidity? See how it's black and awesome and sinister and just cool? What are you doing with this piece of shit NES and Mario, he's all slow and crap? What are you doing? Like, that was the attitude behind these ads. And it worked, man. People were like, must be a bitch if I don't get that. So people went out and bought a Genesis in droves. And I think that ad campaign is really what made the Genesis work instead of the TurboGrafx-16. Like, either one of those I think could have worked. I think it's just that ad campaign propelled the Genesis forward. But so the Genesis did well for the first 2 years of its life. But eventually the Super Nintendo did come. Sega kind of obviously had to compete with that, and they created Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, everybody knows Sonic the Hedgehog, but it's funny, people think that that was a launch title. Nope. Sonic came out 3 years after the platform first launched in Japan, 2 years after it launched in North America. Think about how weird that is. There's a funny story that I've heard about the marketing team behind the Genesis around the time Sonic came out. What they basically said was, look, the Super Nintendo's out now, and we need to sell more units. People are starting to forget. I mean, Sonic's doing okay, but we need to do something drastic. So Sega of North America proposed to Sega of Japan that they drop the price of the console, I think it was $50, and bundle in Sonic the Hedgehog for free. In essence, giving you a $100 discount on the console if you went with them instead of Nintendo. And they proposed this to Sega of Japan and was like, no, hang up. And so Sega of America, I guess, they really fought hard to convince Sega of Japan. And the way I understand it is, the head of Sega of Japan at the time, they finally convinced him, like by going to him, and apparently he just kind of dropped his head and he looked up and he just went like, if that's what it takes to sell the console in America, then go ahead. And they did it, and it worked amazing. They sold so many units, and Nintendo was legitimately threatened. It was also a console that has a lot of oddities surrounding it. To me, it's kind of like the Pamela Anderson of video game consoles. Not only was it really popular in the early 90s, but when it came out, it was the sexy, hot, new thing that everybody really wanted, and they were like, ooh, look how cool that is. But over time, it started to show its age, and then Sega was like, well, let's put some add-ons in there and try and keep it relevant, shall we? Little things like, oh, you know, we'll make, this is our original controller with 3 buttons. Well, you know what, all the new controllers like the Jaguar, the 3DO, they're all coming out with big, like, controllers that are more advanced with more buttons. All right, we'll put out a new Genesis controller. That'll keep the console up to date. And, you know, things like the Sega CD and 32X. The add-ons, of course, are very infamous for this console. I'm not going to talk about them in this video because it would probably take like another 20 minutes and there's no reason to waste your time. So I'll just do a separate video about the add-ons. I hope you guys are okay with that. But there is one add-on I do want to talk about, which is this. This is the power-based converter for the Sega Genesis. Now, this is interesting, actually. The Sega Genesis is the only console in the 4th generation to have backwards compatibility. Yeah, you can play Master System games on it, but like all the hardware for a Sega Master System is completely contained inside of a Sega Genesis. But the big flaw was that there was no way to put the cartridge in there. They don't fit. So Sega released this. It's kind of amazing this came out in North America, considering this Master System was a complete dud here. But all it is it's just a cartridge adapter, really. Like, it just adapts the shape of the pins. You put the cartridge in there and you can play on the Genesis, no problem. Doesn't even require a power supply. I mean, all the hardware is in there. So, but the big flaw with this thing, and this is typical Sega hardware logic, which is we'll come up with a really awesome, exciting, cool idea, but then fuck it up when it comes to practical use. So the big flaw with this thing is that it doesn't have a Genesis slot on it. I mean, think about this. At the time of when this version of the Genesis came out, the Model 1, which is what this is designed for, it doesn't fit on the other designs. You presumably have a Master System collection, and that's why you're upgrading if you want this. But they also made it so that, you know, the controller ports are the same, and the power supply is the same, and even the video cables are the same as the Master System. You can swap out the Master System and just plug this in right in. But if you have to take this out to put your Genesis games back in, kind of defeats the purpose. If they had just had a Genesis slot on this as well, you could have just left this on all the time and then have all 3 consoles, well, 2 consoles all at once. There's also the card slot for Master System games on there. And that's what Sega kind of was. I mean, they had so many great ideas, but always screwed up the execution. And that obviously is part of their add-on history, but they were nuts with the amount. All right, so I would be a fool if I did not talk about all of the other iterations of the Sega Genesis. Now, we're kind of used to that now, to a certain extent. If you think about consoles like the PS3 or the Xbox 360, they have multiple iterations of themselves. And Sega took that idea and completely went out of control with it. Let me just go ahead and show you some of the iterations.
The Sega Genesis Model 1, Japanese Sega Mega Drive Model 1, European Mega Drive Model 1, Model 2 Sega Genesis, Model 2 Sega Mega Drive European version. I don't actually have the Japanese version, but it looks like this. Model 1 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD, Model 2 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD. Looks weird, but will work. Model 1 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD with 32X, Model 2 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD. Interestingly, this is my first Genesis ever right there. You can tell because I put a little sticker on it when I was a kid. Model 2 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with 32X. Model 1 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with official extender. Model 1 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with 32X. Model 1 Genesis with power base converter. Model 3 Genesis, Genesis 3 with 32X. Doesn't actually work with it, so I'm not really sure why I'm showing this to you. Sega CDX, which fun fact about this thing, it is a Sega CD and a Sega Genesis all in one unit. It doesn't support RGB, which is ridiculous, and it functions as a portable CD player. I am not kidding. You can play you put your headphones there. This is how you skip your music around, and it even has battery support right there. That doesn't power the console, but it does power it as a portable CD player. Sega CDX with 32X. JVC XI, which was a Sega CD and Genesis all in one, but it also primarily focused as a karaoke device. JVC XI with 32X. Sega Wonder Mega, only released in Japan, plays Mega Drive and Mega CD games all in one, also functions as a karaoke device, and has a motorized flip top, which, what the hell? And of course, Sega Wonder Mega with 32X. Sega Nomad, a portable Sega Genesis. Yes, you could actually put Sega Genesis games in this and just play this on the go. Sega Nomad with 32X. Pioneer Laser Active, technically a competing console, but it did have a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD built into it. And for the hell of it, Pioneer Laser Active with 32X.
Funny thing is, that's not even all of them. That's just the ones I have. I mean, there's one by Iowa that was like a boombox. There was one that was called like the Terra Drive that was like part of a PC. There was there was one called the Mega Jet, which was like a handheld with no screen that was primarily used for like airlines where they would plug in like a proprietary screen. And that doesn't even include like the crazy clone consoles you can go buy at Walgreens, which I would never include anyway because they're not really authentic hardware. The Genesis was everywhere. I have a little theory that there was one guy in marketing at Sega who eventually moved on to become the guy who markets for cranberries. Basically, my theory is this guy, he went around to like every company. He was like, hey, what are you making there, a Laserdisc player? Just go ahead and put a Genesis in it. Hey, what are you making, a PC? Why don't you just put a Genesis in it? And then eventually when Sega stopped making hardware, he went to every company. He's like, hey, what are you making there, apple juice? Why don't you put some cranberries in it? Like, I think it's that same guy. Like, because it's insane how many places the Genesis managed to just get into. You gotta love Sega for that, because they were fucking balls crazy. Like the amount of just weird shit they did. And that weird shit led to a lot of odd innovations, but it also made that console war really interesting, because if Nintendo did something, they wanted to kind of do the opposite. So a good example of this would be the Game Genie thing. Now Game Genie was a cheat device, like Game Shark, and it was big on the NES because people loved the ability to get past certain aspects of the game that were too hard or whatever. And Nintendo did not like that. They actually sued them and lost. But Sega went, people really like that Game Genie thing. What if we officially license it? So Sega actually licensed the Game Genie just to piss off Nintendo. That's just how Sega rolled, man. Like, it was just a fun time for all these weird innovations and changes in the gaming industry that Sega was bringing on. Stuff like that. Like, every other company, even since then, has gone after cheap devices, and they hate them. You know, they try to stop them from ever being made. This was the one company who was like, fuck it, bring it on. That is awesome. A new way to experience the game. Let's go. I love Sega for their madness like that. They were just so cool. The other thing that Sega did that was totally nuts, that most people still don't even really believe was ever a thing, was the Sega Channel. Now, the Sega Channel was not like a television network type of deal. The Sega Channel was, it was a cartridge that looked kind of like the 32X actually, and it connected to a server at Sega's, somewhere at Sega, and it basically just had a giant list of ROMs. And as long as you had a subscription, you could access those ROMs. It would download like one, let you play it, and then when you were done, you'd delete it and download another one. And you could just play games that way. Now, I'm not a big proponent of digital media, as all you guys know, but gotta admit, that's pretty impressive. When I was a kid, I mean, I was born in the late 80s, 1986, December of 1986. And by the time I was old enough to really understand what a video game was and that I wanted one, the Genesis and Super Nintendo were already out, and my friends all had one or the other, sometimes both. Cousins all had one or the other, sometimes both. I had nothing. So I talked to my mom. I was like, can I please have a video game console, please? She kept being like, no, go away, stop bothering me. And eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. I was just nagging her too much, and she's like, all right, all right, all right. And so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get a video game console. So she's like, come with me. And we go to the basement of our house, and she goes to a closet, and I'm thinking in my stupid little kid brain, oh, of course. She just has one of these in there in the event that I ask her enough times, because that's how that works when you're a little kid. You just think, if I ask enough times, it'll just appear, because they always keep it in reserve when you're waiting. That's stupid little kid logic. Of course, when she opens the closet, it's not a Super Nintendo, it's not a Sega Genesis. What it is an Atari 2600 in a cardboard box. She had bought this at the 1983 video game crash around then for like nothingness and had lost all interest in it. And she's like, here you go, they're all the same. Yeah, that look was pretty much my reaction as a kid. Now, in fairness, I did like that console, and it did hold me over for a little while. It was fun. But it started becoming a problem because, you know, it's school. You know, you go to school and your friends are all talking like, ooh, I love, you know, a Sonic. Well, I love Donkey Kong. They're all debating. I'm like, who likes Pac-Man and Space Invaders? Combat? Anyone? Come on, Combat! You know, you got a little tank. Hello? Like that was really what was happening with me. And so I kept bugging my mom. I was like, yeah, this is great and all, but I really need something else. I mean, nobody's even heard of this thing that you gave me. So eventually, Christmas of 1993 rolls around, and sure enough, I got a Sega Genesis. It was a Model 2, the one that came pre-bundled with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, I don't have the photo with me, but when I was a kid, when this happened, my mom took a picture of me with the console. I'm holding the box above my head, and I'm just like, like it was so happy I got this thing. I'd just been wanting it for so damn long, and I played the shit out of that thing. Sonic 2, man, like that dominated my entire Christmas break that year. It was amazing. So now I'd like to take the opportunity to show you some games I've got for it. Common misconception: when I show you games in these videos, it's not all the games I have. I mean, fucking look right there. There's a lot more. There's more you're not seeing over there. I got loose carts and other places. I got a lot of games for these things that I don't always show you guys because, frankly, we'd be here all day if I did that. Most notoriously with the Wii, when I made that video, people were just like, of course you didn't like the console. You only had the shitty games. I had the good ones. I just still didn't like the console. But that doesn't have anything to do with this video. Just saying, I got more games than what you're seeing. So let's go over some of the highlights. That's what this is. Now, when I was a kid, I played the living crap out of this game. This is Streets of Rage. This is a really cool, like, 2D side-scrolling fighting game. Really a lot of fun. And, of course, it got sequels because it was so cool. Streets of Rage 2, which I think is one of the best games on the Genesis, in my opinion. It's obviously more of the same, but it improved in a lot of ways. I really like this game. Played the hell out of it. There was a third one, which most people didn't really seem to realize there was a third one. This was a very late game in the Genesis lifespan, and I just noticed it for the first time ever. It supports the activator. I wasn't even planning to talk about this, but it just made me think of it. The activator was motion controls in 1993. I have one. It is a ring you'd place around the floor, and you'd connect it to the Genesis, and you just do fighting moves and stuff, and theoretically the characters will do what you're doing. This game is okay. Like, I liked it, but it just didn't grab me the way the others did. I think maybe at the time it was because it was too hard. I'm sure I would enjoy it more now, but either way, it's cool to have because it's kind of an uncommon game. And then, of course, there's the most iconic game on the console, Sonic the Hedgehog. Here's the funny thing about this. I told you before that I played the living shit out of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This is my favorite game on the console, and to this day, probably my second favorite game of all time, second only to that masterpiece, Shenmue, and of course Shenmue 2. But, so having played this one and loving it so damn much, I was excited when I found out, well, I mean, I guess I didn't find out because I knew it was the second one, but by the time I was like, oh, now I have the first one, I was really disappointed. Like, honestly, I don't really like the first game. I just don't think it's that fun. It's not that it's a bad game. It's kind of like seeing Terminator 2 and then seeing Terminator 1. Like, it doesn't work that way. Sonic 3 I actually like quite a bit. This one a lot of people don't like. I do. I think it's a pretty cool game. But it does feel like half a game, but like half of a really long game. And there's a reason for that. This game was compatible with this. This is Sonic and Knuckles, which I'm going to actually take out of the casing here. Now this is funny. This is how we basically did DLC in the early 90s. This is a cartridge, of course. It is its own game, as you can see. It'll play and have the other half of this game. But if you had Sonic 2 or Sonic 3, you could connect them just like this and suddenly new content. Yes, that was how DLC worked in the 90s. Think of it as a standalone game pack that becomes an expansion. So what you would get is you'd be able to play through all of Sonic 3 and then all of Sonic and Knuckles and you could change which characters. Like if you had both, you could play as all three Sonic, Knuckles, Tails. And of course, it was also compatible with Sonic 2, and it allowed you to play with Knuckles in Sonic 2, which was really cool. Fun fact, if you plug any other game into it, it'll say no way, meaning like it won't play it, but there's a little code thing you can do, and then you can play like a bonus mission. But now I want to talk about some other games I quite enjoyed, and they all have some sort of little interesting story behind them, some more so than the others. Now these two I'm really only including because I played the shit out of them as a kid, which is the Power Rangers games. Power Rangers, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. I'd say this is the better game. This is it's kind of like Streets of Rage, but officially licensed Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So you have those characters, not as well made. I really like the music in it. I know that's lame, but I think the music in this game is really good. I mean, it's the Power Rangers music without the lyrics, and kind of like a 16-bit rendition. I don't know, I really enjoyed it. But you might, unless you played as a kid, you may not enjoy it much as an adult. This one I also really liked as a kid. It's a fighting game, Mortal Kombat style, less violent, of course, has the characters, but short. Really short. Like this one you could probably beat in like a half hour, 45 minutes maybe. I can beat this game provided it's on easy mode, which, you know, whatever, in less than 10 minutes. Like it's like 5 levels. It's super easy and you're done with the whole game. Now as a kid it had infinite replay value because to me as a little kid I'm like, oh, it has the 5 main Rangers plus the Green Ranger, so you can play as all the Rangers, you can fight everybody. Like, oh, I can repeat and it somehow isn't repetitive, you know what I'm saying? So whatever, that was fun. Now, interesting, fun game here that actually really helped the console was Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. Now, Michael Jackson really liked Sega. I don't know how that relationship really formed, but Michael Jackson, at the height of his popularity, came out randomly in favor of the Sega Genesis, which people were like, hey, if Michael likes it, then I want one of those. That was another part of their Sega does what Nintendo. You think Nintendo's getting Michael Jackson on their platform? I don't think so. That's a Sega only thing. So he had his own game, which is an odd game. Obviously, you play as him and you like fight people and you free little girls from closets. I know, weird. I didn't really like it that much, but it's definitely a very cool thing to have in your collection. But yeah, whatever. Interesting though, that wasn't the only thing he did with them. He did the ads, obviously, he did this game, but we found out only recently, like after he died, we found out he actually did some of, if not all of the music under no credit for this game, for Sonic 3. I know, how weird is that? Because you wouldn't assume he did the music, but he apparently took like a fake name to get credited in this game, and Sega didn't reveal this until after he died, which is kind of interesting. And that actually isn't where it ended either. He actually did some games for the Dreamcast. He did Space Channel 5 and Space Channel 5 Part 2. There's another game that was really iconic to me as a kid, which was Disney's Aladdin. Now this game is interesting for a lot of reasons. Now, if you're younger, you may not know this, but back in the day, a multiplat didn't mean the same game on everything. So a multiplat now is, all right, I made the game, I'm going to put it on the Xbox One, I'm going to put it on the PC, I'm going to put it on the PS4. It's the same game across the board. Yes, maybe some textures are different, maybe the resolution is different, maybe one has different DLC, you get it. But it's the same game. Back in the day, that was not the case. When a game came out on the Genesis and on the Super Nintendo, often they were two totally different games. This is probably the most definitive and iconic example because Disney had licensed out the movie rights for the game purposes, obviously, of Aladdin to Sega, who was sure as shit not going to make a Super Nintendo version, and Disney had an ongoing deal with Capcom to make their games for the Nintendo, the hardware. What you ended up with was two vastly different games made by different studios, and that happened all the time. I think the jury is pretty out that the Genesis version of Aladdin was much better than the Super Nintendo version, but I'm sure there's a few people who will debate that. So it was always a crapshoot. You never knew which one was going to get the better thing, which was really awesome because that was another reason to have two different consoles. Is it always felt like you're getting a shit ton of good experiences here and a shit ton of totally different good experiences over here, which was very, very cool and something to be respected again. It's also interesting because this was the era when movie licensed games didn't suck. You know how like easy it was to make a movie licensed game that was okay? Granted, it had to not be by LJN, but you know what I'm saying? Like it was actually possible to make movie licensed games that were good back then. And now an example of a game the Genesis got where it wasn't as good as the Super Nintendo counterpart, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist. Now I really, really like this game. I do. I think it's a great game. But what this is, when you really break it down, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time, but not as good. Because Turtles in Time took advantage of the Super Nintendo's extra abilities, such as rotating and scaling, to give you that like F-Zero type of level. And to give you that part where you grab the foot soldiers and you have to like swing them around and throw them in Shredder. That does not exist in this game, because the Genesis was simply not capable of that. So they said, okay, we want to put a version of that out. We can't just strip out those parts. So they compensated you by adding different levels and changing up the story and all that. And so you end up getting a really good game. It just debatably isn't as good as Turtles in Time. Secret, I prefer this game over Turtles in Time. Sorry, it's true, I do. But yeah, that's how that went. However, I do think that if they had released Turtles in Time on the Sega CD, where it would have been technically possible, might have been a game changer for the Sega CD, kind of doubt it, but possible. Now I'm going to show you some other games, ones you probably never heard of. I'm going to open this by quoting a YouTuber who has since basically retired from YouTube, who was a big inspiration to me, MN12Bird. He said something very apt once about the Genesis that is very true. The Genesis, the best games on the Genesis, as he said, are the lesser known ones. That's totally true. So when you see people debating what was better, the Genesis for Super Nintendo, which, like I said, for some reason still gets debated, people will inevitably bring up that the Super Nintendo, oh, it had Legend of Zelda, it had Mario, it had Super Metroid. Like, they can list all the usual suspects of Nintendo characters, because those were successful. They were wildly popular amongst most people. You know, they got out there and everybody heard about them. The Genesis didn't really have that. It just had Sonic and nothing else that really caught the mainstream's attention. But that doesn't mean there weren't other really good games on it. It just means you haven't heard of them for the most part. See, Sega's marketing team, as awesome as they did with that initial campaign, they were never really able to make people understand what games were on the console. They just kept releasing content hoping that people would buy it up. But Sega was, or Sonic was the only thing they could really market as like a mascot type of character, where Nintendo was much more successful with that. So for every amazing gaming experience that existed on the Super Nintendo, there was a Sega counterpart. You just didn't hear about it most of the time. So I'm going to show you some examples of this. Some of these I mean, I don't presume to know how much you as an individual know about the Sega Genesis and its library, but I would bet that most people watching this have not heard of all of these games. So there you go. First up is Comix Zone. This is probably the best known of this batch, actually. Comix Zone is a really cool game about a comic book creator who gets trapped inside of his own comic book and he has to like fight his way out. It's a cool side-scrolling beat-em-up fun game. It's part of a Sega IP that is, again, totally lost to history because Sega doesn't really do much with their IPs. Next up is one that you will all laugh, and you have every right to, but let me explain. McDonald's Treasureland Adventure. Now I know, on the surface you go, what the fuck are you showing us that trash for? That's the thing, it is not trash. This game is fucking awesome, and you would never, ever think that was the case. So, this game was made by Treasure. Now, Treasure is a really good development team. They are the guys who made Ikaruga. I mean, they made a lot of good stuff. I just have a guess here. I think what happened is that McDonald's wanted to make a video game to sell fucking hamburgers. Like, what else would they want to make a video game for? I think they just licensed the characters over to, like, the cheapest video game developer, which perhaps was Treasure, and said, yeah, just make us a game that we can put out there on the video game machines, and we'll sell some hamburgers. And I think that, no doubt, what was expected of Treasure was to make an LJN caliber piece of shit that just, whatever, just frustrated everybody. But Treasure, to their infinite credit, seemed to be like, look, we actually have a license to use McDonald's really fucking weird characters, and they're like, we can use all of these to make whatever fucking crazy game we want. And that is exactly what they did. They ended up making a really good platform where you play as Ronald McDonald, and you have like clown magic that can like blow shit up, and you like kill things, you collect items, and you have to always beat the level. And it's a really good game, and it actually looks amazing. Like, it is amazing how much they put into this game, and I highly, highly recommend picking this up. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of people did actually realize that at some point, because it is now quite a rare game. But yeah, if you get your chance, this is a fun game, and you would never, ever expect that. I'm just glad I bought it when it came out, and I think I bought it when it came out because I was a fat kid, and I was like, McDonald's! I think that must have been the logic, because I don't know what else on this cover would have attracted me to this game, but I got it and I don't regret it. That was a cool game. Next up, Rocket Knight Adventures. I think a few of you probably have heard of this, but Rocket Knight Adventures, again, really cool side-scrolling like platform. It's very similar to Mega Man. made by Konami, and it's a lot of fun. It's really cool. It has a sequel too called Sparkster, which I don't have. That game's quite rare, but I hope to get it one day. But yeah, that's another really cool game, again, that most people have never heard of. And oddly, it seems to use like Back to the Future type of font on the front. Maybe it helps sell, I don't know, but very cool game. Gunstar Heroes. This is one of the best looking games on the Genesis. Visually, like once you have it hooked up through RGB, wow, it just explodes with color. It's a very cool game. Again, another side-scrolling action-adventure shooting game. It's very, very cool. And if you guys saw the previous video in the series, I talked about the TurboGrafx 16 and its iconic game, Splatterhouse. Now, when NEC basically stopped supporting it, they took the most valuable asset, which was Splatterhouse, and wanted to give it sequels on the successful hardware. Now Nintendo, I'm sure, turned this down because Nintendo is the guys who said, all right, Mortal Kombat's going to have green blood. Like, they wouldn't even allow blood in the game. So Sega was like, fuck it, bring it on. I love that attitude. Fuck it, bring it on. So they got Splatterhouse 2 and 3, which the one interesting change they made is that they made the font entirely red as opposed to green and then red at the bottom, because red at the bottom means blood is spilling off the word. One could make the lawyer type of argument that since it's all in red, that it's not blood, it's just the color of the font. I don't know. I'm just speculating about that right now. But these are really cool games. And like I said before, they're basically about a guy who like sells his soul to a demon and like gets powers to like fight off people before his daughter and wife and shit get murdered and raped. It's crazy. But these are really cool games, and I highly recommend picking them up if you can. But again, not very common. And now this game did not come out in the Genesis commercial lifespan, but it is definitely worth noting. This game is Pure Solar. Now this game is interesting because this came out, I think, in like 2009, 2010. I actually did a video on this back when it came out, one of my earlier videos, and I unboxed it, and I've since, essentially resealed it just to protect it. This is a very well-respected game, and it looks great on the Genesis. It's also the biggest Genesis cartridge ever made. Like, not obviously physically, but like inside it holds the most memory. It also has a really cool feature in it. It supports the Sega CD in a very unique way, which is that if you have the Sega CD, you can put the music disc in there, and when you're playing the Genesis game, it will detect that CD, and it will give you the CD audio quality music while you're playing the Genesis version, which obviously has load times and all that. The only flaw with it, of course, is that once a song ends, it goes dark, it goes silent for a second before it starts up the next song, but still a really cool feat. And my only real criticism of this game as a release, not so much as the game itself, is just that I really wish they had utilized 32X support in some capacity, like an extra code in there that made it look even better if you had a 32X. I don't know damn thing about programming, I admit that up front, but now that they're redoing this game for the Dreamcast, and they've already re-released it for like the Wii U and PC and other things, I would hope they could theoretically re-release it on the Genesis with exactly what I just said. If you have the 32X in there, that you'd get additional visual capabilities that the Genesis could not do. Again, I have no idea if that's even possible, but damn, that shit would be cool. But yeah, guys, that's the Sega Genesis, man. Like, it is a great video game console. I highly recommend you get one. The console itself is pretty cheap. You can get that pretty easily. Games are starting to go up. Super Nintendo felt that first, which is not usual. Usually it's in order of release. But the Super Nintendo video games just skyrocketed. They became insanely expensive. Genesis kind of stayed around the same. But the last year or two, Genesis stuff is starting to go up there. Like a lot of the games I just showed you in this last batch especially are much more expensive than they used to be. So if you like the Genesis, strike soon. We don't need to debate whether or not it's better than the Super Nintendo. I mean, people, of course, are free to do that, but they're both amazing video game consoles. I mean, you ask me, my opinion, I'm going to tell you, I like the Sega Genesis more. But it's a hair, man. Like, it is so thin. Like, my first console ever, as far as preference, is the Dreamcast. But then it's the Genesis, then it's the SNES. There's no reason to, like, hate them or hate one or the other just because you liked one more than the other. Love them both. They are both amazing video game consoles that should be enjoyed by everyone. There is no reason, if you prefer the Super Nintendo, to deprive yourself of a Sega Genesis. And that goes in the other way. If you love the Sega Genesis, there is no reason to deprive yourself of a Super Nintendo. But yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned to part 4, which is actually going to be the Sega CD. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys all later.